Genesis chapter 1, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and the darkness hovered over the waters. And God spoke and said, "Let there be," and there was light. And God said it was good. You ever ask the question, why? What's so good about light? What's so good about light? It can't just be that light is good and darkness is bad. We've seen where that sort of dichotomous trajectory takes us, where lightness is good and darkness is bad. So no. It can't be good because light is good and dark is bad. You are equally blinded in pure light as you are in pure darkness. So why? Maybe the light was good because when you have some light mixed with some dark, what you get is contrast, distinction, differentiation. Suddenly you can see what previously could not be seen when it was just one or the other. Genesis chapter 11, there's a story that describes all the people of the earth being assembled together, and they had one language, one culture. And they thought to themselves, we've got this new technology where we can build incredible things. What if we made a name for ourselves and built a city so great with the tower so high? And they set to work to build this immense achievement that could only be done because everybody was the same. And it was easy. And it's said that God looked at this project, and this is my translation, and thought, holy crap, they might pull this off. And so God sprinkled them around, mixed up the languages, introduced a kind of contrast, difference, where previously there was just sameness and uniformity. One more story, Acts chapter 2. You remember this story? The followers of Jesus, their leader had just recently died and risen and then come back and eaten some fish and then, went away again. And they were like, well, now what do we do? And they gathered together on a Sabbath, which happened to be the feast for Pentecost. And they did what they sort of thought they should do. Let's break bread. Let's have a meal. Let's do some prayers. Let's sing some songs and figure this out. I don't know. It's up to us now. Our leader's gone. And you remember this story. Suddenly, I love thinking about the individual who wrote this down for the first time. Suddenly, it was like tongues of fire. Guy looking over his shoulder, that's what you're going with? Yeah, this will be good. Tongues of fire, like just alighted upon everybody. And the surrounding community of individuals outside of this gathering began to huddle up and say, aren't all them Galileans in there? They're all the same. Well, then why do I hear him in my language? Well, then why do I hear him in my... Hold on, I speak this, and yet I can hear it in my language. It's almost as if, pure conjecture, it's almost as if the Spirit of God, when she saw this new movement beginning, this group of people that was going to take on this message of this teaching, this way of Jesus, it's almost as though the Spirit of God was like, if we're doing this thing, it is not going to be one more movement where everybody looks the same, talks the same, sounds the same, thinks the same, not on my watch. Hey, what's up, everybody? My name's Colby, and it's really good to be here with you. As Ryan mentioned, I do come from Southern California. I was told February is the coldest month in St. Louis, so I brought this, and you've got like 80 degrees out there, which I love, but it's so good to be here with you. You can see behind me what I want to do today is I want to share 7 lessons I've learned from inclusion. It's not because I've only learned 7, but it's because I only have 57 minutes left. And the first lesson, based on these 3 stories that I just shared with you, is this. I believe that there exists a divine preference for diversity. I believe there exists a divine preference for diversity. I think you can see that in the opening chapter, the opening verse, the opening scene of the Hebrew Bible. I believe you can see that in this Tower of Babel story, which is oftentimes, as I grew up, was taught about this story in which humans had gotten too proud and arrogant, and this fragile egoic deity known as God got his feelings hurt, that they might be as powerful as he, and so he scattered them. And I look at the story now and I'm like, no, I think God saw all, and again, I'm not taking this story literally or historically, right? I'm entering into the story as it's told. I think God saw this moment in human history where there was this bent towards sameness, which is kind of how we are as humans. It's just, we have this sort of propensity to bend towards sameness. We gravitate towards that which is like us, and we sort of fear that which is not like us. And you do that enough over time, and you end up getting empire, you end up getting stormtroopers, where everybody just looks the same, talks the same, is expected to think the same. And I think God sees this moment and says, I know where that path leads, and it's not good. And I think the story of Pentecost kind of speaks for itself. Again, this thing gets going, and God's like, we're not going to do this again. It's not going to be one more movement. I think there is a divine preference for diversity. And before I share the other 6 lessons with you, I want to give you a bit of context for what I mean when I say lessons learned from inclusion. So I have been a pastor for just over 20 years. The first 10 years of those were in more conservative evangelical spaces. Hi, my name is Colby, and I'm a recovering Baptist. Is that woo for Baptist or recovery? I'm not sure I don't know what to take that. And then the last sort of 10, 11, 12 years have been in more, post-evangelical, progressive Christian spaces, and kind of the pivot for this transition in my vocational ministry life. It occurred around the topic of, this is going to surprise you, of LGBT inclusion in the church. This was the thing that sort of catapulted me from one kind of ministry into another. And the quick story on that, which I do tell in my first book, Unclobber, Rethinking Our Misuse of the Bible and Homosexuality, I tell a bit of the story of how I was born and raised in a conservative Baptist evangelical home, and went to college and got my degree in pastoral ministry from a Baptist college. And it was about a year after graduating that I was in the process of getting licensed. At the time, I was working for a Christian Missionary Alliance church in Salem, Oregon. And I was on my lunch break one afternoon, preparing for the final interview for my licensure, where I'd have to sit before a panel of seasoned veterans in the CMA denomination and get quizzed on the policies of the denomination so that I could prove that I was worthy to be a pastor. And I'm studying for the exam, and I'm walking through the lobby, and I'll never forget this moment. I'm reading through the policies and the procedures of the denomination, and I get to this moment where I read this line, and it's something to this effect. The line says this: practicing homosexuals shall not be members of the church. And I remember thinking, but what if they're really good at it? Followed by, okay, I get it. Like, being gay is a sin and it's not God's design because to put you in the timeline of my life, this would have been 2007, so I was still firmly entrenched in my evangelical Baptist ways, and I knew the right theology that the Bible condemned those who were gay and same-sex marriage was not approved by the divine. But I couldn't wrap my head and heart around the fact that they couldn't be members in a church. This was the first moment where I noticed a split in myself between my head and my heart. My head was rooted in this sort of theological certainty, but my heart suddenly was, but wait a minute, this is how we treat them? This is the outflow of that theology? There was this tension in me that I had never noticed before. I had never really thought much about it. I didn't have any gay friends or family members, but I just noticed, like, oh man, that's interesting. My head and my heart are not together on this. Fast forward a few years, I got licensed. I succeeded in passing by the skin of my teeth. I moved down to Arizona. Don't recommend. I'm just kidding. I'm not kidding. I actually just felt uncomfortable that I said that, so then I tried to bail on it. And I'm working at a large evangelical church just outside of Phoenix. And over the course of my first 4.5 years there, I'm in this process of auditing my religious collection of beliefs, if you will. The things that I had both inherited from my family and my church and trained in. And I went through this process over those several years of realizing this is going to shock the three Baptists in the room, but it was news to me that throughout the history of Christianity, there were other ways to think about the Christian faith. I don't know if you know this about Baptists, but we're really unique in this, is we see that it's Jesus, Peter, Paul, Baptists. Just an unbroken line. Ignore these 1,800 years, doesn't matter. We've got it figured out. And so I'm reading these books that would not have been approved by my Baptist professors, but I'm on my own now and drowning in debt. I can read what I want. And so I'm reading these books and realizing that, there's great diversity of thought within the Christian tradition. And so I started this process of auditing a lot of my beliefs. And I don't even remember to this day what caused me to eventually revisit that moment in the church lobby in 2007 when I noticed this disintegration between my head and my heart. But something within me around the year 2010 said, Colby, it's time to figure that out. It's time to get alignment here. And I didn't know how it was going to go. I didn't know if my study into what are sometimes called the clobber passages. These are the 6 verses in the Bible that historically have been misused to justify discrimination against those who identify as LGBTQ, hence the title of my book, Unclobber. I didn't know going into that I didn't know if I was gonna have to grab my heart and be like, I know that it sucks, but this is what the Bible says, so figure it out. Or if maybe I would discover something different. And spoiler alert, I discovered something different. I discovered that we've gotten it wrong. Oh, what a relief. What a relief. We've gotten a relief just for me and my integration, not a relief insofar as it relates to the 2,000 years of damage that have been done, of course. But I came to the conclusion that we've gotten this wrong. The Bible does not, in fact, say what I had always thought it had said. But I was working at an evangelical church in which I was not free to talk about it. And so I went through about a year or so, once again being disintegrated, this time not between my head and my heart, but this time between my internal convictions and my external reality. Can you relate? You ever been there? Where you got some new ideas going on in here, some new thoughts, some new feelings, some new convictions, but out here you're like, okay, but also mortgage, groceries, health insurance. At the time, I was the only income earner for our family. We had 3.5 kids. And it was about 2010 2011, September 2011, President Obama signed the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, the military ban against service members, gay and lesbian service members. And at the time, I thought naively that the people in my evangelical community would see it the same way that I did, which was a great, yeah, you're laughing because you knew better than I did. I thought, no, this was great. This is the end of a discriminatory practice, and my church hates discrimination. I just didn't read the fine print. And so I put on Facebook, yeah, correct response. I put on Facebook a link to an article announcing the repeal with 6 words, "I'm glad this day finally came." I go to bed that night feeling great about myself. And I wake up the next morning, and you can imagine the string of comments that had filled up that post of mine of why is the church now pro-homosexuality, and why are the pastors advocating for the gay agenda? Which, by the way, I've been a decent ally for about 12 years now, still waiting on my copy of the gay agenda. So if you know where I can get one, let me know. And I get to work that day, and my boss, he tells me about how his phone blew up over the night, and he's like, "Colby, I need you to take that post down." I'm like, "Okay, I'll take the post down." Thought that was the end of it. Get told the next day that, hey, on Friday, there's going to be an emergency board meeting. Not the word you ever want to hear in front of board meeting. Am I right? Emergency board meeting to discuss this. And I knew this was going to be the moment where I had to make a choice. Could I keep living in this disintegrated reality, or was it now finally time to come out of the theological closet, if you will? And I knew going into that meeting that if just left to the moment, if I didn't come in prepared with something, is my point, there's a chance that all my trauma responses would activate, and I would just go into like freeze/fawn mode, and I would just, okay, never mind, guys, sorry, I take it all back. Please let me keep my job. I did not want to do that. So I spent all night Thursday night writing out this, I think it was like 10 pages, y'all. What's wrong with me? Why am I so verbose? I don't understand. My motto is, why use 10 words when 50 will do, right? I mean, it's like, and so I write this 10-page letter, and I show up at the board meeting, and they ask me, like, just right out the gate, what's your doctrine on gay people? And what do you believe about same-sex marriage? And so, well, funny you should ask. I've got something for you. And I had a copy for all of them, right? Like 10-page letter times 10 men, obviously men, I told you it was evangelical church, times 10 men, that's 100. I killed a small bush in this effort, people, to share once and for all with the men in this room. Guys, here's what I found. We've gotten this wrong. Here's what I think about this verse, this verse, and yes, I would vote for gay marriage. P.S., can I please still work here? And they said, why don't you not come in on Sunday? We'll fill your spot, and we'll talk about this next week. So I took the weekend off, came back in on Tuesday, and was handed my letter of termination effective immediately. Of course, at the time, I said this last night to a group that I was doing an event with. At the time, that was one of the hardest, darkest nights of my soul. We'd built a home there, both literally and metaphorically. We had our 4th kid coming on the way, and it was all over. And I never saw my church again after that. So this community that I poured into for 5 years, doesn't matter. My point is it was a really, really, really hard time. And yet now, 12 and a half years later, it was the greatest thing that's ever happened to me. I mean, how true is that? How true is that, by the way? This is not a lesson learned from English. This is not on my list. You're getting a bonus one right now. This is like 1.5, but one of the lessons that I've learned from doing this work is, you know how, you know this. Everyone here in this room could have their own version of this story, but you know the version of the story where you look back on your life, the timeline of your life, and you find these moments that at the time were the hardest, most painful moments. And yet now you look back on them and you see them with perspective and you see them in a new light, and you have almost, is that gratitude that you feel? Wow. You're grateful for that? Think about that. That's incredible. And I was thinking about this the other day, and you all know Thich Nhat Hanh, right? May he rest in peace. He has this teaching where he says if you want to suffer less, suffering is inevitable, right? This is one of the four foundational truths of Buddhism. Suffering, dukkha, is inevitable. But if you want to experience suffering less, you got to learn to suffer better. Like, get better at suffering so that you can suffer less. And I was thinking about that recently, and the thought that occurred to me is one way to suffer better, to get better at suffering, this gap between the hardest, darkest nights of your soul and the moment in your life where you can find a bit of gratitude for it, what if we closed this gap? What if we could tighten up the time between when we experience deep pain and sorrow and when in our life we might be able to be just a little bit grateful for it? Not easy. Not easy. But the thing about gratitude in this context is gratitude can assign a type of meaning to an event. And the thing that hurts the most about this pain and suffering is that it feels meaningless and purposeless. And so gratitude injects meaning so we can tighten this time. Okay, speaking of tightening the time, Colby, get back to what you're here for. Okay, so I've been now doing this work for 12 years. And when I say this work, what I mean is that sort of pivotal point of leaving for good, literally for good, evangelical world to continue to do ministry. But now I was free to do the kind of ministry that really was a part of my heart. And out of getting fired and out of this research that I did into these clobber passages, this is where the book on clobber came from. And this has now provided for me for the last 10 years opportunities to travel and to speak and to continue to write and meet with people online in these spaces that are fully affirming and inclusive. And we started a church in San Diego in 2014 that was fully inclusive from the beginning. And what I want to do, why I'm here, what I want to share is I want to share 7 lessons that I've learned now from doing this ministry in the context of inclusion over the past decade plus. And I've given you the first one, that there is a divine preference for diversity. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to now put on the screen 3 questions, because in a minute, be honest, in like 60 minutes, you're gonna have some more time with your table, your process groups, and I want to give you these questions ahead of time so that you can be thinking about them as I go, because these are what we're going to discuss here when we turn to our groups. I want you to think about which of the lessons that I'm about to share with you seem obvious, or like you already knew that, you've already learned that. Okay, this is something you know. Share that with the group. Question 2, which of the lessons that I'm about to share annoy you? Or do you just flat out disagree with? Which honestly, I won't care if you disagree with me. It'd be strange if you didn't. This is one thing I told my church almost every Sunday, is what I'm about to preach to you, if you just believe it straight up, then we're losing here. And then the third question is, what's a lesson that you've learned in the work of inclusion that either I didn't mention or maybe I haven't learned yet? So something that hasn't come up that you could share with your table. So those are the 3 questions. I want those to just saute in the back of your skull as I go through these next few lessons. So, lesson 1, there is a divine preference for difference. Lesson number 2 is, you could say it like this: multiple approaches will be required in this work. Be wary of any voice, including mine, that suggests that there is one right way to do this kind of work, okay? It's like we know this when it comes to other parts of life. We know, for instance, that there is not one way to lose weight or to gain muscle. We know there's like multiple different approaches depending on all sorts of contexts. We know that there's not one right way or one right modality for therapy. There's all sorts of different approaches in the therapeutic process that play different roles. Just by show of hands, who's ever been head shamed by picking up a hat that says one size fits all and you're like, not mine? Yeah, some of us have really large cabezas. And I'm like, no, there's not one size that fits all. So in this work of inclusion, where we are attempting to reintroduce the world to a gospel that is truly good news for all, because I believe that was the original intent of Jesus, in this work of trying to invite people into a broader way of thinking about things, it's going to take a lot of different approaches, because the problem is big. The problem is big. I mean, I don't know what the numbers are, but last I heard, something like over 90% of churches in America are still non-affirming, still non-inclusive. The problem is significant. So the solution, so we're going to need a number of different approaches for this work. I'm gonna step outside my lane here for just a moment, so forgive/indulge me, and then I'll get back into my lane to keep going. Just because I want to illustrate why I think there's multiple approaches that will be required. A number of years ago, a friend of mine, she's an author who's got several New York Times bestsellers, big platform, broad influence, and she was heavily moved by, I forget now what the event was, but there was some event in our culture. It might have been Ferguson. She was really moved to begin to use her platform and her voice to enter into the space of racial justice and reconciliation in that work. And so she's a white woman, and so she sought the counsel of her black women friends, like, what's the best way to do this work? And what the feedback she got was, you, as a white woman, like, need to teach and do this work with other white women. Like, that's your work to do. And so my friend went through all this planning to do this online teaching workshop to like invite other white women to come in and do this sort of anti-racist work. And so she announces this with great fanfare and excitement that she's like ready now like to do this work, and immediately starts to get some pretty serious backlash from people, and a lot of those people were black women saying, this is not, like, you're doing it wrong. This is not for you. This is not how it should be done. You should not be using your voice in this way. You should be elevating women of color who have already done this work. And my friend was very confused because she's now getting conflicting advice. And then I think she ended up not going through with it. But one of the things that I took away from that was there's always going to be people who have different opinions and perspectives on how a thing gets done. And there just is not going to be a one way that fits every situation. I was flying here from Las Vegas on Saturday, and I was watching the Willie Mays documentary. And I knew he was one of the best baseball players ever, but I didn't know much about his life. And there was a moment in the documentary that was talking about the intense racial injustice of the movement in the 60s, and it started to bring in, Martin Luther King, and it started to bring in Muhammad Ali and Bill Russell and some of the other athletes that had entered into this space. And Jackie Robinson, they read a letter from Jackie Robinson in which he criticizes Willie Mays for not being more outspoken about these things. And the people who were doing the documentary tried to show that Willie Mays was actually, in his own way, doing all sorts of things like more behind the scenes. And Willie Mays tried to say, your approach is just it's not my skill set, it's not what I'm good at, it's not what I'm doing what I can, but I'm doing it in my different way. And yet, once again, I was impressed with the fact that these vast problems that require significant solutions, they're just multiple approaches are going to be required. All right, I'll get back in my lane here really quick. I remember when Unclobber first came out, I was prepared for backlash from the conservative world and my old evangelical world. That I assumed was coming. What I wasn't prepared for, again, I was super naive, I wasn't prepared for the backlash coming from the left, coming from the more progressive world. And a lot of that feedback came in the form of, Colby, you're a straight man. You should not be talking about these things. Like, you need to just sit down and get out of the way. This isn't for you. And because I am an Enneagram 3, and because at that time especially I had a very unchecked, fragile male ego, I got defensive. He says it like though he's changed all that much, and I don't know, guys, I'm doing my best here. But I got real defensive because I didn't understand the critique. I didn't understand what they were saying. It took me a while to finally listen and learn and understand what they're saying, and while I can now totally steel man their argument and I understand what they're saying, what I wish I could go back now and respond with, or at least invite them to consider, is now that I've been doing this work for 10, 12 years, here is what do you know what I hear more than anything else? What I hear more than anything else when I get emails, when I get DMs on Instagram, when I'm out doing events in person and I meet people in person, from the LGBTQ community, from those who identify in that, comment that I hear more than anything else is this. They say, Colby, you don't understand. It's actually because you are straight doing this work. That is why it has landed with me in such a profound and powerful way. And they go on to explain, they say, I've read other works by people who themselves are gay or lesbian, and they're incredible works, and they are incredible works, but they will say to me, but you don't understand, as a gay person, I read this book, and it just, in the back of my mind, I just think, okay, but they're just sort of doing it to justify. Like, it's hard for them to really shake that, and yet then they come to a book like Unclobber, which Unclobber isn't all that remarkable. This is not the point. But they come to a book like this, and they say, but because you don't have a dog in the fight, like, reading your words, it lands differently. And the takeaway here is not a pat on the back here for me. The takeaway here is multiple approaches are going to be required. We need, sometimes the right move, sometimes the right move in this work, 100%. Sometimes the right move is to sit down and shut up. And sometimes the right move is to speak up. Sometimes the right move is to share your perspective and experience, and sometimes the right move is to share the microphone so that someone else can talk. Sometimes the right move is to turn the other cheek. Sometimes the right move is to turn over tables. And if you're looking for a map to code out when the right time is, I don't have that. What I have is I have now a decade plus of experience of just knowing it's going to take multiple approaches, and you're just not going to find a way to do it where everybody is going to be happy about it. Okay. Lesson number 3. Sooner is better. Sooner is better. I submit to you that if you try and wait until everyone's on board, if you try and wait until all collateral damage can be accounted for and prevented, you will wait forever. I've gotten to know so many people who have done this similar kind of work, pastors, leaders who have taken churches through, for the example, through the process of becoming open and affirming. And I'm just telling you, you don't have to believe me, that's fine. But I'm just telling you, I have not yet talked to someone who said, I wish I would have waited a little longer to move our church. To a T, everyone says, I wish I actually would have done it sooner. And I think that feedback matters. And I know that in practice, and also, by the way, my assumption here, I'm making an assumption, and the meta assumption is that I'm probably wrong. But the assumption right underneath that is, I'm assuming that the churches that are here, that are represented here, are probably already inclusive. So I don't know that necessarily there's folks in this room that need to be convinced sooner is better. Or maybe not. Again, my first assumption stands. I'm probably wrong. But I think maybe even if it's just not, let's just take the becoming an affirming church off the table, because maybe that's already happened. What's the next thing that's facing your community right now? And to put it bluntly, are we putting more energy into protect the feelings of those who are already comfortable, or to protect the vulnerabilities of those who, as Richard Farrar Capone says, are the littlest, the lost, and the least? Like, where are we putting our energies? And I just think sooner is always better. Get to it. Get to the work of showing those in your community that you are for them, you are with them, that you are safe, that they are a part of the family. Sooner is always better. Lesson number 4. Inclusion has limits. What in the world do I mean by that? Inclusion has limits. Just because everybody's in doesn't mean everyone gets an equal voice, is my thinking, based on my experience. One of my fundamental beliefs is that all people are loved children of God. This is as many things, as many of my beliefs that I've audited over the years and either ditched entirely or changed substantially. The number of things that I used to hold so close and tight, like these are precious to me, I will never let these go. I've let go of most of them, but one that I have yet to let go and probably never will is the fact that all people are loved children of God. Like, I am fully committed to this. If God is love, and if God has created all things, and if God is the one in whom we live and move and have our being, then there's really no other option than that we are also in love, in God. We are love. But there has been, in many of our religious traditions, there has been an attempt to have this parallel thought about God, that God, yes, God is loving, we totally are with you on that, but God is also just and holy. And there's been this effort to try and hold these two together as though they're like equally important. And so what has happened is we've had churches and traditions and denominations that have talked about the unconditional love of God followed by all sorts of conditions. Yes, God is loving, but God is also holy, and you can't do this and you can't do that. Yes, God is loving, but the extreme version of this is, but God didn't choose you before the foundations of the world, so you're SOL, right? This is the extreme version of it. And so we've been faced with this predicament where we have so many churches that have this, yeah, God is loving, but mentality to it. And so then what's happened over the past, certainly the past several decades, but I know it goes farther back than that, but certainly over the past several decades, what we've had is we've had churches that have attempted to remove this parallel line about God being also holy and just, and have said, no, we are committed, we are radically committed to this idea that God is pure, unconditional love, and that's it. And so we've taken this pendulum and we've swung it all the way over here, which is often the move that needs to be done in any sort of work when you're trying to course correct, is you kind of have to sometimes swing the pendulum all the way, and sometimes it is a bit of an overcorrection. And so we have now so many communities that have said, no, God is pure love, only love, everybody's in. And we've elevated tolerance and inclusion because it's been so ignored or repressed for so long. And what I've learned is that if you follow this pendulum swing far enough out, you run up against some edges. Because, and this is what we learned in our church just not too long after starting it, is yeah, everybody's in, but not everybody necessarily can have equal voice. And And here's why, because if you are compelled by an inclusive value, which we certainly were, and I believe many of you are, then my commitment to inclusion almost requires that I have a kind of exclusion. And by that I mean, if I am committed to creating a space that is sold out for this idea, again, in my context, that all people are loved children of God, then I really can't have people who have whether it's a board vote or a leadership position, who fundamentally actually don't believe that. And so now I have to create these exclusion. How weird is that to say out loud? It gets kind of weird to say, well, actually we're going to exclude some perspectives from leadership. It gets really complicated really fast. I mean, ideals are so fun to just say everybody's in, but then when you get to the nitty-gritty of it, it's like, well, what does that actually look like? And what I found is that inclusion has some limits to it. It is your job as leaders to ensure the protection of the most vulnerable among you, which might require sometimes that some people don't get as much of a voice or as much as a say. And that's not comfortable to have to say. I mean, try saying that at your next town hall church meeting. What people will say to you is, okay, no, well then we revoke your inclusion card. You're now being intolerant. Yes, I'm being intolerant of intolerance. You've got me. You're correct. Lesson number 5 is going to sound like I'm contradicting myself. Lesson number 5 is this: if you're open-minded, act like it. If you're open-minded, then act like it. What do I mean by that? Now, I just talked a minute ago about how one of the lessons from inclusion is to sort of recognize that just because everybody's in doesn't mean that everybody gets equal voice, particularly if that voice is anti the everybody's in message. So you have to have some limits to this inclusion value. But now, I'm going to submit to you that if you, as an individual, are on the other side of a kind of fundamentalist, fear-based religion perspective. So if you have sort of transcended the myopic view, and again, in this context, the myopic view that LGBTQ people are abominations or somehow uniquely disordered, whatever that sort of viewpoint is that many of us maybe used to have, or at least that we're familiar with, and we're like no longer there. And we're also no longer in some of maybe these other more small-minded doctrines. Some of the things that Reverend BLACKMON a minute ago helped us name, like, yeah, that's how we used to think and feel, and now we're not. If you are more open-minded, liberal, progressive, whatever adjective you want to use, I actually think that there are times in which you will be called upon to make space for the more conservative among you. Here's what I mean. You are probably familiar with Paul's letter to the church in Rome, and that his effort, at least as I understand it, his effort was to unify this church that was fracturing along ethnic lines. There was this sort of Jewish Christian, Gentile Christian war going on in the church in Rome at that time. And so Paul writes this letter to get them to try to, verse 12, chapter 12, live in harmony with one another and make peace, if at all possible, with one another. And then you can hear the church being like, okay, but how do we do that? And this is where chapter 14 comes in. And it's really, really interesting what Paul does in chapter 14. He outlines these two factions of the church and describes them as those whom he calls weak faith and those whom he calls strong faith. And what Paul says here is that the strong in faith should bastazo, I don't know why I went Italian there. What was that? Bastazo, I don't know. Okay, moving on. The strong in faith should bastazo the weak in faith. And bastazo here means to take up, to bear, to carry, to hold. In our modern day parlance, you might say to make space for. The strong, Paul says, should make space for, carry the burdens, the weaknesses of the weak in faith. And when we talk about making space for in our modern parlance, we might say things like we're creating a non-judgmental atmosphere where that person can be fully themselves and bring all of themselves onto the table and not be judged for it. Now, in the context in Rome, what were the needs, what were the weaknesses of the weak that Paul was saying the strong must bear? It was the fact that there was some meat that had been sacrificed to idols that the weak in faith said we shouldn't eat, and there were some days that the weak in faith said should still be set aside as holy. In other words, these issues of meat and holy days were ways of breaking up the world into categories of sacred and profane, of good and bad. It was a dualistic way of seeing the world. It was this sort of more conservative, fundamentalist way of viewing God and viewing the world. This is the feature of early stage religious fundamentalism, where we see reality as being all about in, out, us, them, right, wrong, and so on. And what is Paul saying? Paul is saying to the strong in faith, if you have transcended that mentality, if you've moved beyond that, I'm expecting you to hold space for those who still think like you used to think, BT dubs. You are to hold space for and bear the needs of those who still think that some food is up. Paul's like, look, I get it. I'm with you. No food is unclean. That's not really a thing. I'm with you. No, there's not some days that are more different than others. I'm with you guys. But he says to the strong in faith, but I need you to not flaunt your liberty. And by the way, this is one of the ways that I find myself sometimes distancing from some of the more extreme versions of progressivism, both in the church and in the culture writ large. Because I think sometimes on the left, not only can we flaunt our liberties, which at times, whatever, that's fine, flaunt, but I've noticed that there can be a sort of regression to fundamentalism within progressivism where we now take it a step further and we actually are now forcing our perspective on others. Rather than, quote, bearing the weaknesses of our siblings who still think and believe in these more conservative fundamentalist ways that we ourselves used to also think, rather than sort of hold a kind of space for them, we belittle them, we mock them, we look down upon them. Why am I saying we? I have belittled, I have mocked, I have looked down upon, I have thought myself better than. And yet, according to Paul, it seems that in the economy of the thing that God was doing, this new movement, at least as far as Paul understood the social order of how this new way could manifest in the world, in his mind, the invitation was for the more liberal, the more open-minded ones to defer to those who aren't there yet. So you might be asking, okay, Colby, so what does that look like then? To which I'd say, I have no idea. Now, if your church was dealing with food sacrifice to idols, I could maybe help with that. But that's not the issues that we're dealing with. But maybe we are dealing still with people in our churches and our families and our communities who still see the world as fundamentally divided up into two categories of right and wrong, good and bad. clean and unclean. So I don't know, maybe the way these two lessons fit together, is we just have to ask each situation what is asked of us here, rather than trying to have it. This goes back to multiple approaches are required. Rather than have, okay, we're always going to do it like this. Anytime you approach a thing with always, you're probably going to regret it. So in each moment, you might ask, is this a time where we got to draw some lines and say we can't actually make space for that because of our commitments to this? Or maybe in a given moment, you're like, guys, I know this is going to be hard, but we kind of got to suck up our evolved way of thinking. Okay, lesson number 6. I got 2 more. If I was doing these in terms of order of magnitude of importance for how they've impacted my life, this one probably would have been number 1. Lesson number 6 is this: the margins, no compassion. The margins, no compassion. My friends, my chosen family who are part of the LGBTQ community, they have shown me over and over and over again what compassion looks like, what forgiveness looks like, what patience looks like, what kindness looks like, in ways that I've never been able to touch myself or sniff or get close to. It's unbelievable to me, the capacity that many people in the queer community have for patience and kindness and forgiveness and compassion. I can get all hot and bothered and fiery and have an uncle who posts something obnoxious on Facebook and just be like, and we done. We done. Boundary. Not in my life anymore. And look, sometimes that's the right move. Again, this goes... Aren't I so helpful? I will say a thing and then just say the other thing that's opposite right after it. It's so helpful. But I've watched just so many of my queer siblings endure the kind of resilience and grit. Family members who truly just fundamentally don't agree that they are a loved child of God. Now look, I can hear the therapists in the room say, okay, but sometimes people who are in these toxic, unhealthy, abusive relationships will stay much longer than they should stay. And yes, that is 100% true. And yes, there is absolutely times when you might say to some of the examples I'm giving you, well, yeah, that person probably should have a much harder boundary with their mom. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And do you ever have this sentence run through your head? They don't deserve my grace. You ever thought that? Or something like it? And then immediately been like, what did I just say? They don't deserve my grace. That's the point of grace, is that it's not deserved. So I have learned so much. Patience. Man. Gay friends of mine who I check in, hey, have your parents, do they accept you yet? Like, no, not yet, but I'll be there this Thanksgiving. Like, why do you still go? And again, I know there are situations and contexts where hard boundaries is the way to go. I'm with you. And I'm just telling you what I've learned. That at times when I have thought to myself, oh, it's time to bail on this, or I can't grant forgiveness for that, I have learned from those in the margins a kind of tenderness, a kind of patience, a kind of strength. I'll do the final lesson here, and then I'll turn it to those 3 questions, which I hope you have a lot to talk about now. The final lesson is this: you still have not arrived. And the you here is all of us doing any sort of work of inclusion. You still have not yet arrived. Look, enjoy where you're at. I am oftentimes the first one in progressive circles to remind people of the importance of every once in a while turning around and being grateful for how far we've come. Like, we have made a lot of progress. We've made a lot of progress. We have. I was just talking with Matt during the last session, and he was talking about how he just got back from a large gathering of Methodists of some of the, I think it's like the 100 largest Methodist churches. It's this meeting they do. And he said he's gone to this thing for years, and every year it's been 100 dudes in the room. And he said this last year, for the first time, like 10% of the 100 were women. One way to look at that is like, seriously, only 10? Another way to look at that is that's 10x more than the year before. Not really, I know math, 10 times 0 is 0. You know what I mean. That's amazing, like progress. We're not there yet, but every once in a while we do, I think it would behoove us to recognize, man, we've come a long way. Look at your own churches. Look at yourself. Look at yourself. Okay. I don't know if the lights need to come up. I'm coming down. I know you don't know me. So what I'm about to do and say might not matter or mean anything, and that's okay. I'll take the risk. But I need to tell you something. You're doing a really great job. 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 I know it's hard. This work's hard. Doing a great job. You're doing a great job. I'm really freaking proud of you. Keep going. You're doing great. You're doing so great. I'm so proud of you. You're doing a great job. It's hard. It's lonely. But you're doing great. You're doing a great job, y'all. And the cynics among you are like, Colby, you don't know me, you don't know us. I kind of do, insofar as you're here. You're here. Which tells me there's a part of you that you're doing a great job. Which tells me that there's a part of you, a not small part of you, that believes in this work so much you would travel across the damn country, give up of your time, be away from families to be here. That's all I need to know that you're doing a great job. You're doing it. And if the only reason you came is that some Southern California ex-pastor who's sweating in too big of a coat can look you in the eyes and tell you that you're doing a great job, Michael, you're doing a great job. I don't know, it's worth it to me. So every once in a while, yeah, we got to pause, and we just got to let someone tell us how we're doing a great job. Proud of you. And we haven't yet arrived. Both those things are true. The mountain that you just spent the last 3 years climbing It's just prepared you for the next mountain. I'm sorry. I know. But you're not alone. You're never alone. And as you go from here, back to your churches, back to your communities, back to your families, know that there's at least one guy who's really proud of you. You're doing a great job. You're doing a great job. Okay, that's my time. Thank you.